the cognitive neuroscience of puns and dad jokes. Alright, let's dive into something that probably makes you groan and maybe, just maybe, secretly chuckle. Puns and dad jokes. You know the type. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Or, I'm reading a book about anti-gravity. It's impossible to put down. Yeah, those. We've all been there, either as the deliverer or the recipient of these linguistic masterpieces of, well, of something. But have you ever stopped to wonder why these often cringeworthy jokes even exist, and why, despite ourselves, we sometimes find them a tiny bit amusing? It turns out, there's some pretty interesting stuff happening in our brains when we hear them. It's not just random silliness, there's a cognitive dance going on. First up, let's talk about puns. At their core, puns are all about playing with words, specifically words that sound alike but have different meanings, or words that have multiple meanings. Think of your brain as a super efficient language processor. When you hear a sentence, it's rapidly making sense of the words, predicting what's coming next, and building a coherent picture. Puns throw a little wrench in that smooth operation. When you hear a pun, your brain initially processes the most common or expected meaning of the words. Then, the punchline hits, and suddenly, there's a clash. I used to be a baker, but I couldn't make enough dough. Your brain first thinks of baking dough, then the punchline forces it to switch to the monetary meaning of dough. This switch, this reinterpretation, is where the magic, or the groan, happens. Neuroscientists have looked into this. Our left brain hemisphere is heavily involved in processing language, understanding syntax, and the literal meanings of words. But when it comes to getting the humor in a pun, especially that moment of aha, I see the double meaning, the right hemisphere often kicks in. The right side is more associated with understanding ambiguity, appreciating subtleties, and grasping the bigger picture or the unexpected twist. So, a good or bad pun gets both sides of your brain talking to each other. It's a mini mental workout. Your brain has to detect the ambiguity, hold the two different meanings in mind simultaneously, and then understand how they create that surprising, often silly, connection. That little bit of cognitive effort and the subsequent resolution can actually be quite satisfying, even if the joke itself is objectively terrible. It's like solving a tiny, ridiculous puzzle. Now let's bring in the dad jokes. While many dad jokes are puns, they also have their own special flavor. They're often characterized by their predictability, their straightforwardness, and sometimes their sheer, unapologetic lack of sophisticated wit. What do you call cheese that isn't yours? Nacho cheese. The beauty, or perhaps the defining feature, of a dad joke is that you can often see the punchline coming from a mile away, or it's so obvious that the surprise is in its very lack of surprise. This predictability plays an interesting role. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns and make predictions. It helps us navigate the world efficiently. When a dad joke follows a very familiar, almost formulaic structure, our brain kind of goes, yep, knew that was coming. This can be humorous in its own right, a sort of meta-humor where we're laughing at the type of joke as much as the joke itself. It's an expectation fulfilled, even if that expectation was for something groan-worthy. So, why do we secretly, or not so secretly, love them, or at least tolerate them with an affectionate eye roll? One popular theory in humor research is the incongruity resolution theory. This suggests that humor arises when there's a mismatch, an incongruity, between what we expect and what actually happens. Then, we find a way to resolve that incongruity, to make sense of it in a new, unexpected way. With a pun, the incongruity is the clashing meanings, and the resolution is getting the wordplay. With a dad joke, the incongruity might even be how shockingly unfunny or obvious the punchline is, and the resolution is recognizing it as a classic example of its genre. Another theory that fits well here is the benign violation theory. This idea proposes that humor happens when something violates our expectations or norms, a violation, but is also perceived as harmless or okay, benign. Bad jokes, puns, and dad jokes definitely violate comedic norms. They're not usually clever, sophisticated, or laugh-out-loud hilarious in the traditional sense, but they are utterly harmless. Nobody gets hurt by a bad pun. This combination of a violation of what makes a good joke coupled with its complete harmlessness can trigger amusement. The groan itself is a social signal acknowledging this benign violation. And that brings us to a hugely important part of why these jokes persist, the social element. Think about when and where dad jokes are usually told. It's often in a relaxed, family, or friendly setting. The joke isn't just about the words, it's about the interaction. Telling a dad joke can be a bid for connection, a way to be playful. The anticipated groan, the eye roll, the reluctant smile. These are all forms of engagement. It creates a shared moment. You're all in on the joke, even if the joke is how bad the joke is. This shared experience can be a powerful social glue. It's a low-stakes way to interact, to lighten the mood, and to reinforce bonds. The love for them might be less about the joke's comedic genius and more about the warmth of that shared, slightly exasperated human connection. From a brain perspective, when you get a pun or a dad joke, even a bad one, there's often a little flicker in your brain's reward system. Areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in higher-level thinking and understanding social context, and language centers in the temporal lobe are highly active. Then, when you understand the punchline, that moment of resolution, areas associated with pleasure, like the ventral striatum, can show a little burst of activity. It's not necessarily a belly laugh's worth of dopamine, but it's a small acknowledgement that your brain figured something out. It's also possible that there's an element of effort justification, albeit a very minor one. You put in a tiny bit of mental work to decipher the pun or to process the anti-climax of a dad joke. Having expended that effort, your brain might be slightly more inclined to find some value in the outcome, even if that value is just the satisfaction of getting it or the amusement of its predictability. So the next time you hear, "Why did the bicycle fall over?" Because it was too tired, and you let out that involuntary groan, remember what's happening. Your brain is nimbly navigating semantic ambiguities, engaging both its left and right hemispheres, recognizing patterns, or the humorous lack of surprise, and participating in a social ritual. It's a complex cognitive and emotional response packed into a seemingly simple, often silly, string of words. Even more fascinating, these groan-worthy jokes serve a deep social purpose. They create shared experiences and strengthen bonds. When everyone collectively groans at "I'm reading a book about anti-gravity," it's impossible to put down. They're participating in a communal ritual. And who knows, maybe that groan is a sign of affection, a secret code that says, "I get you, Dad. I get the joke, and I get you." So, embrace the dad joke, share it, groan at it, and appreciate the complex simplicity of its charm. It's more than just a bad joke, it's a connection. It's a reminder that sometimes the silliest things can bring us together, and that's no laughing matter, or maybe it is. Even more fascinating, these groan-worthy jokes serve a deep social purpose. They create shared experiences and strengthen bonds. When everyone collectively groans at "I'm reading a book about anti-gravity," it's impossible to put down. They're participating in a communal ritual. The universality of dad jokes across cultures suggests they fulfill a fundamental human need. They're safe humor, harmless wordplay that doesn't punch down or exclude. They welcome everyone into the joke. So next time you roll your eyes at, "Did you hear about the guy who invented the knock-knock joke? He won the Nobel Prize," remember your brain is actually reveling in linguistic complexity. These simple jokes are showcasing our uniquely human ability to play with language, connect with others, and find joy in the wonderfully absurd corners of our minds.